get out of the way. I would say as a parent, get out of the way. It's their journey. And when the parent leads the journey, especially, they're not 12 anymore. These kids are 16, 17, 18 years old. When the parent's leading the journey, the kid is always the follower. At some point, you got to get out of the way and switch the roles.
Welcome back or welcome to Y Option. I'm your host, Yogi Roth, and it is good to be home. Been on the road for the last, 10 days or so, and it is good to be back in LA. Earlier this week, visited with UCLA, visited with USC, and here we are at the end of the week. And today's episode is going to be all about quarterback play, which is going to be a theme of these two schools we talk about in USC and UCLA. The interview today, presented by our founding partner, 76, is with Dan Orlovsky. Jake Heaps is kind of like a special guest co-host. So, Jim, he didn't take over your role. He just jumped in for a couple stops.
I mean, he crushed it. I mean, Jake knows all about, waiting in the wings, and that kind of gets into the conversation here about like him and Dan, how they do that all those years where, as the backup guy. But yeah, I mean, no surprise. I mean, we just aired Jake's podcast. What was that? Just last week? I don't know. The weeks are starting to run together here as we get closer to the season. But yeah, I mean, he's just a talented guy. And Dan was, as you'll see here shortly, is just full of energy. So.
Yeah, he's as smooth as they come. Big shout out to Jake Heaps. His episode continues to crush it. I've gotten more letters and DMs and messages from parents than any episode we've done thus far on recruiting, on development, on just playing the quarterback position, the art of that position, which leads us to UCLA and USC training camp. Ironically, both teams play LSU this season in non-conference play. They'll play each other, of course, towards the end of the season. UCLA traveling over 22,000 miles. USC not as much, but still have some dramatic road trips to some really fun places, including their Big Ten opener, which is at Michigan. So, Jim, let's dive into UCLA. I'm curious for you, what's your biggest question about the Bruins? I'm going to see if I can answer it based on being there for camp.
Well, I mean, it's funny because I watch the training camp show you and Ash and Coach DiNardo did on Big Ten Network, and I think Ash's line was from Honolulu to Piscataway. So, it's gonna take some getting used to. But I think the most obvious thing is, how are things going to be without Chip Kelly there? Deshaun has been with the team for several years now, so it's not like it's an unknown factor. But new head coach, bringing in Eric Bieniemy, who's been, one of the top offensive coordinators in the NFL the last several years, and has been kind of as great as he had done. It had always been under the shadow of Andy Reid there, so now he's really going to get to like do his thing. He's going to get to see what it's like back in college again, because it's been a while. But UCLA, it's going to be interesting because I think there's so little expectation on them this year, despite the fact that they've had success the last several years under Chip. They've not had like gangbusters, success, but they were winning. I mean, they had a winning record. So I think the move for them, they've been the team that kind of everyone just goes, oh yeah, they're gonna do whatever. So I think they'll probably have a nice little chip on their shoulder, which I'm sure you probably experienced a little bit there on Monday. So I'm curious, as for with you being boots on the ground there with the road trip from home, how things look at the Bruins for you.
Yeah, I'll say this. You're right. I think nationally, people don't know what we know out here on the West Coast, which is the last 3 years they've won 8 or more games, 9 games once. So it's not like this program is like, oh my God, it's in the gutter. It's got to be a total rebuild. I think it was Chip Kelly left when he left, why would a head coach at UCLA entering the Big Ten leave to become an offensive coordinator in the same conference? And I think that has been, an element that people at UCLA have had to answer of like, what's going on over there? But when you're around there, I was there a ton in the spring, a few times in the summer, and obviously earlier this week, it's a really healthy environment. I had multiple assistants come up to me and say, God, they did a really good job recruiting players. We got good kids here, right? They go to school, they're driven. It's one of the best institutions in the world. So I think that's starting point number one. Why do I say that? It's because all the players lean in. They've leaned into Akaika Malloy, the defensive coordinator. They definitely have leaned into Eric Bieniemy, as you referenced, the offensive coordinator. And most importantly, on the field, they look like a totally different team than one I saw in spring. And part of that is the way that Eric Bieniemy taught. He did not want to have a modality where throw the entire playbook at this offense and let them just drown in it. He said, no, let's just do a couple things really well. Very similar to what Danton Lynn did last year at UCLA as their defensive coordinator. It was just give them enough, repeat it. And now when you watch Ethan Garbers, my man was surgical. And I think that's going to be his biggest trait. Above the shoulders, I think he's going to be able to dissect defenses. In addition, the hot topic everywhere is the iPads and the earpiece. Right now, play callers can talk to quarterbacks. Eric Bieniemy has been talking to quarterbacks for a long time. He's very aware of this system, whether he or Andy Reid. He did it last year in Washington with Sam Howell with the Commanders. He's very attuned to how to do this. And I'm excited for that because I think a lot of college guys are saying, hey, it's a little different. I'm trying to find out the flow of that. So I don't expect UCLA to go win the Big Ten, but I don't think they're going to get drilled. I really don't. Defensively, their strength is their linebackers. Femi Oladejo looks the part. He's going to move all over the place. Kay Madrano looks the part. The linebacking core looks the part. And physically, I think this team's got a shot. They got skill players that are gifted. They've got two running backs that I think are talented. And I think they're going to call a different style of game. We're going to see a huddle, Jim. Look out. You're going to see a fullback. They're going to just see stuff that we haven't seen in a while. And the players are into it. So I'm excited for that for the Bruins. We'll see how it kicks off. I think you look at their first two games, Hawaii on the road, they get a bye, then Indiana. There's a world where they go 2-0, and then they head on down to Baton Rouge to see what happens against. Is Brian Kelly undefeated? Did they lose to the Trojans? Who knows? So that's my UCLA thoughts. The Trojans for you, Jim. Your questions that you're curious about. Is there something that you're like, I need to figure this out about USC?
Well, I mean, it's just exactly the opposite. I mean, because no matter what USC does every year, there's always that the expectations are through the roof the next year, and that if you win 8 or 9 games at USC, it's a disappointment. So I think the one thing I'm not really worried about is Miller Moss. I think he's going to do great. I think we saw from him in the bowl game. Obviously, very very small sample size, but he showed that not only can he do the job, but also that his teammates are bought into him being the guy. So I think that's good. I mean, the obvious question then will be what happened with what's coming over from UCLA with the defensive coordinator, and just how that's been mostly fair, but not always fair. The sticking point with USC fans the last several years was the defense, and now having brought in the leader of the Bruins defense, which was one of the top defenses in the country last year. I mean, when you just look at the numbers, can he have that same sort of turnaround with the talent that they have in Trojan Land?
Yeah, that's all really fun and fair questions. I think a couple things coming out of practice. Number one, you're right. Expectations are always going to be bonkers at SC. I just want to lay out the facts again. Since 1980, if you subtract the 9 years that Pete Carroll was there, the Trojans have 6 10-win seasons or more. 10 wins or more. So I get it. Lincoln has one of those. He's getting paid a ton of money to be the head coach. The standard was set. You could argue in year one, I would argue that they hit lightning in a bottle, didn't have to play Washington and Oregon, and they had the best player that my eyes have ever seen at quarterback, and the offensive line was good. Last year, the offensive line struggled. They tried to fix it in the portal. It never really landed. From what I saw today, Jim, if you look at this thing from the inside out, the offensive line with Jonah Monheim at center looks the part. They're athletic. They're physical. They look every bit as big as an Ohio State and Oregon offensive front. The defensive front, from the inside out, Bear Alexander has all the potential in the world. Anthony Lucas has all the potential in the world. Solomon Tuliaupupu, 7th year, defensive end, defensive tackle, has all the potential. Solomon Tuliaupupu, baby. They got all the potential. And then you look at Easton Mascarenas Arnold, Beef fans who are watching, earmuffs. He and his brother, of course, they're stars for this defense. You look at the middle of this defense, along with Kamari Ramsey, who came over from UCLA. Down the middle of this defense, they got a shot. Eric Gentry is going to be the best version of Eric Gentry. The receiving core, you go to the skill positions. I think it's the most underrated core in America. My breakout player, Jacoby Lane. Call it here. Y Option said it first. Look out for this dude at wide receiver, along with Zachariah Branch and Deuce Robinson, who will be coming on this podcast shortly. A little tease for him. And we already heard from Miller Moss. If you haven't, check it out in past episodes. So what do I think about this team? I think they're going to be really competitive, but I don't think they have the competitive depth of two of the animals that are just different in Ohio State and Oregon in the Big Ten or just in college football. I do think they can go and beat LSU. I do think they can go into the Big House. I do think they can beat Wisconsin at home. I do think they can play with Penn State at home. I just think the margin for error is going to be so small, man. And I don't think the depth is better, but it's not elite. And here's my last point. And Trojan fans, if there's one thing you hear today, hear this. It's a foundational year for your team. It's not a rebuild. It's not year one. It's a foundational year. What the heck does that mean, Yogi? You have the defensive staff set. You have now a variety, over a dozen second-year players that are going to contribute. So second year as in sophomores like Zachariah Branch and Deuce Robinson and guys that I just referenced, or second year in the system like Anthony Lucas, like Bear Alexander. That's what I'm saying. You have that experience. They have 6 second-year offensive linemen, redshirt freshmen or sophomores. You look at the defensive line. Braylon Shelby will be a star in his second year. I just say that the foundation is there. I talked to Lincoln Riley about it. You can watch it on the Big Ten Training Camp show or watch it on YouTube. I'm sure it'll be up there. I'm sure we'll link it in this puppy at some point. But it's a foundational year. So keep the momentum going. You might not win every game. Maybe you'll hit lightning in a bottle and make a couple plays you need to. Maybe it'll probably go 50-50. You win some, you lose some, you win 8 to 10 games. That's probably what I think I'll net out with this team by the end of the season. But it's moving down the track in a right way, in my humble opinion, Jim.
The one name that you mentioned there, I mean, you rattle off a bunch of Trojans in there, but the one name that I know, a guy that we've talked about a lot over the last couple of years, and I'm excited to see because the flashes Eric Gentry. I mean, when the flashes are there, he's the best player on the field, it seems. I think back of how well he played at Oregon State. Was that 2 years ago?
Oh yeah, won the game.
Yeah,
I mean, you could argue
he was incredible
until the last.
He was incredible in that game, and if that guy can play like that all the time, then there is a chance for them to be special because they don't make them like that. I remember the first time seeing him up close and personal and being like, wait, this guy's a linebacker? It was just,
bro.
it was.
You ain't lying.
It was incredible.
You ain't lying. Yeah, it's a good point. I asked an NFL scout on the field today, or earlier this week, excuse me. I asked an NFL scout earlier this week about Eric Gentry. Does it remind him of anybody in the league? And he goes, no. I mean, 6'6" with a 7'6" and a third a quarter-inch wingspan. I mean, just a monster. I think they'll move him all over the field. I think he's got a chance to really be a game wrecker this year. All right, so with that said, let's talk about our episode today. It's Dan Orlovsky along with special guest host, or co-host, I should say, in Jake Heaps. Dan Orlovsky is a guy who spent over a decade in the NFL as a backup quarterback for the majority of his career. I watched him explode in college football in person when UConn beat my beloved Pitt Panthers. It was a Thursday or Friday night up in Connecticut. It was a miserable experience. I was a sideline reporter in my first year ever broadcasting, Jim. I didn't know what to ask the head coach after the game, but I had to ask him some really tough questions. And my old head coach, Walt Harris, I hope you forgive me, but I had to be truthful when it was an embarrassing loss for us, but a huge win for Dan, catapulted his career. And now look at his career. He's one of the main voices on ESPN around the NFL. He also does some work in college football. He works around the draft. But I love this conversation because it's directed at the quarterback. It's directed at the parents of a quarterback. We shared a part of this conversation with the Elite 11 quarterbacks earlier this summer, where Jake Heaps serves as the head coach. we were able to capture a much longer version of this dialogue for today's episode. So proud to share this conversation presented by our founding partner, 76, with ESPN broadcaster and NFL and college football analyst and friend, Dan Orlovsky. Enjoy.
Ready, set, dream cabin nestled in the woods. Just 4 hours to go. New job halfway across the country. Butterflies before a first date. Wherever you go, 76 fuels all the ways you go, go, go.
Fired up to be joined. Dan Orlovsky, 12 years in the league. Dan, I remember your college career very well at UConn. You put it on my Panthers on a Thursday night. It was like my first year ever broadcasting, man. It was a great game by you in that stadium going nuts. But in totality, the theme for this year's Elite 11 is the phrase chase what matters. And fundamentally, we believe that the best in class, quarterbacks, coaches, CEOs, leaders, and all of our case studies, they have great clarity around what matters most. They are confident in stating what matters most, and they have a disciplined approach in how they attack and look at that. So for you, I'm curious, in your 12-year career, like, what mattered most, or you in your quarterback life, when you look back on it, whether you were the 17, 18-year-old in the chair right now at the Elite 11 finals, or a guy who was in the chair in the league, or now looking back on it, like, what mattered most to you at the position?
Yeah, certainly like an evolution, Yogi. I would say when I was let's call it a mid-teen, and I realized, okay, I could throw, and I was relatively intelligent. What mattered most to me was I wasn't like a dynamic athlete. I wasn't. Or athletic. I wasn't the kid that was big, fast, powerful, tall, strong. But I wanted to play quarterback in college football. So what mattered most in that moment was making sure that the weaknesses that I had, I didn't run from. I wanted to almost embrace and be okay with it and be like, all right, if I'm good enough in some areas to go play relatively high level college football, I'm not in some other stuff. So what mattered most was for me getting quicker with my feet and filling up my body a little bit. I was like this lanky kid, and then also getting faster. And so it was this mindset of, I'm not going to let that stop me. If I don't make it, it won't be because of that. It might not be because I'm not as good, talented, or throwing the football, or I'm not as smart as I was, or I thought I was, but it's not going to be because I didn't jump enough rope, or I didn't work on the ladder. I didn't, try to get my 40 time to a point where offers would come in. So that's what mattered most in that moment. And then when I got into, late high school, what mattered most was learning how to become like a better leader to match the talent that I started to develop. And it's one of those fine edges that I tried to learn over a long period of time to walk on and I never really got to see it from somebody else until I got to the NFL, was being those two people at the same time. These guys, and Peyton Manning and Matthew Stafford were the two that I watched, where these guys knew, and you can be this as a 17-year-old, like, when you're good. Like when you're the guy, like you are the big man on campus type of thing. I'm the best player on the field every time I step on the field. But also, I just wanted my teammates to know that I knew I couldn't be anything without them. And that was really important to me as I got into the back end of high school and then into college. And I was thankful that I had coaches that held me accountable to that a little bit. And that's what mattered to most, like back into teen years. And then when I got into college, what mattered most to me was I was going to go make it into the NFL. And I'll never forget my academic counselor. And this isn't maybe the greatest advice, but my academic counselor was like, you got to pick a major. And I was like, I'm going to go play in the NFL. And she was like, don't put all your eggs in one basket. And I remember getting up from her couch respectfully and being like, Ellen, they already are. And so like, it was just that mindset of I was going to go do whatever it took to get there. And, when I played at UConn, you knew this, we were never, more often than not, the more talented team. We just weren't. We were always going to play teams that were more talented than us. So how did we and I closed the talent gap was the study of film. What mattered most to me in college was when we stepped on the field, I was going to be the most prepared person. I knew exactly what we were going to do every single play. I could tell everybody what their job was, and I knew exactly what you were going to do as a defense just by studying tape. And so that would be that talent gap for us. And so when we would get to the line of scrimmage and I saw that you guys were going to do something because of tape study, I would get us into the best play possible. And then we played on an even ground. And that's what mattered most to me because I was like, we're not going to win. I hated losing unless we could close that gap. And so I think that was my college journey of what mattered most. And then when I got into the NFL, it was two things. What mattered most was I wanted to be a starter. And through my first couple of years, I did everything humanly possible to become a starter. And the NFL told me you're not a starter. Like they just did. I wasn't good enough. And then what mattered most was, okay, there's 53 jobs. And more than likely, I'm the one person on the team that doesn't get to prove my worth every Sunday. So how do I prove my worth every other day but Sunday? And that's what became the most important thing for me, was proving so I could prove to the organization, to the coach, to my teammates, I'm worthy of one of those 53 spots.
Now, Dan, as you talk about being proving yourself in that difficult circumstance where you're not able to step on the field, you're not getting the practice reps. Yeah, I backed up Russell Wilson, didn't give the backups hardly any reps. I'm sure I know that that's probably the same case with Stafford and with Peyton Manning and the guys that you've been around. So you're not getting reps. How are you going about that? How are you doing that?
Yeah, so I think what started to become a big thing for me was the concept of mental reps. So certainly when practice was happening and those guys are getting, and Jake, you know this, Yogi, you guys know this, there's not a ton of reps in the NFL. So when you're in the NFL and there's 8 reps in a team period, well, every single one of those reps, I would be the person who was 8 or 10 yards behind. When the huddle got called, I would pretend to be in the huddle like I was the guy, and I would give my own, pointers or whatnot. It was like this imaginary friend type of thing, And so try to do that. Ball gets snapped, and I would emulate what I would try to do in those plays to get those mental reps. But then I realized like that wasn't enough. So what became to help me, but also to consistently prove my worth was, on a Tuesday and everybody's, kind of taking care of their body. Hey, you rookies, you're with me. Offensive rookies, you're with me. And even if you're a defensive secondary guy, we're going to get in for an hour and we're going to go onto the field and we're going to jog through like the mistakes of last week or the game plan of last week. And then Wednesday morning, all the second string guys or the third string guys that maybe, again, they don't get a ton of reps at practice. We're going on the field at 6 a.m. and we're basically going to run through the practice script full speed. And so we're going to get reps. I'm getting reps, but I'm also helping, because one of the things as a backup quarterback, really a quarterback in general, is if we take society and there's people who are highly intelligent, and there's people who maybe aren't as intelligent, and there's people who come from no money, and there's people who come from tons of money, and there's people who are extroverts, and there's people who are introverts. The goal is to be able to take that one message and communicate it to all them, and how can you get all of those different people who listen differently or hear differently to understand it? And I think playing quarterback in many ways is that same problem. You have all these different players on your team and all these different players on your offense that learn differently and think differently and see differently and process differently. So in those Wednesday mornings and Thursday mornings, to get the third string tight end to understand what the purpose of the play was in the same way that the second string running back, who are two totally different people, like that really developed me problem solving wise and communication wise. And so that became, and that again brought value to the football team and to the organization for me.
But for the last 16 years, Elite 11's been around for 26 years. It's our 26th season. But for the last 16, we've had every quarterback write an essay before they show up at the finals. And in that essay, they have to answer a question around, describe a moment when you met adversity and how did you compete your way through it. So I'm curious for you, because we're in this era where, especially for these quarterbacks at the Elite 11, and especially like prior to your first snap in college, I feel like a lot of the adversity is kind of like snowplowed away, right? Because now it's paying you to go on a visit. Now I'm paying you to come here. Like there's the NIL exchange and the portal where you can dip and leave. All things that are just reality. And we're all, I'm sure, on this Zoom here, on this call, for players getting paid in some fashion. But the adversity part, I think, is real. Like, I don't think you have to meet it like you've had to meet it when you were at UConn or when all of us played at our respective stops. So as you look at the quarterback through your lens now, like, how much does adversity and being able to meet it become a part of success? And then how would you define what adversity may or may not have to look like as a guy who came onto a team? I think you were on a team that didn't win a game, right? Like, you know what,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
what that's like on the field.
Yeah. I think what used to be opportunity and the way that we all viewed opportunity is the same way that many of these kids have to start to view adversity. The way that opportunity was always expressed to us as young athletes was it's going to come at some point. I can't tell you when, but the last thing you want is to not be ready for that opportunity. And because a little bit of the NIL, there's way more opportunity and it comes way faster for these young men. Adversity is the same thing right now that used to be opportunity 20, 25 years ago. I could promise you adversity is going to come. I don't know when, and I don't know how it's going to show itself. And the last thing you want is to not be ready to handle that adversity. You know, Yogi, I have so I have 12-year-old sons. And we live in Connecticut. We live in a relatively like affluent area, wealthy area. And I say to my kids all the time, and I say it to my wife specifically, like, we have mom and dad have some money. We live in a good area and we're white. The life of my kids is going to be relatively easy for the most part. So we have to bake in things that are hard for them so they know when struggle or adversity comes, like, oh, I've done this. I've done something that's difficult and whatnot. And I think for a lot of these quarterbacks, it's paramount for them to find different ways, whether it's your trainer, your quarterback coach, your high school football team, the way you're getting ready for college, to build in different ways to learn how to deal with adversity, because it's going to come. And the way that college football is trending now, it's becoming like the NFL. And the best way to tell a young person about the NFL is to correlate it to the stock market. Okay, the stock market works like this. I own stocks. I'm the owner of a company. If that stock is making me money, I don't care what it is. If it's making me money, I will keep it. If it's not making me money, I will get rid of it. That's the same way college football feels like right now, or trending towards. That's the way the NFL is. If you're helping the owner of the Buffalo Bills make money, he will keep you. If you're not, he will get rid of you or find a different option. And in the same way, college football has that feel a little bit, where it's like, hey, if you're helping our program, if you're helping our organization generate these funds, we've got a spot for you. If you're not, we're going to be looking elsewhere. And then all of a sudden, if you don't know how to deal with that, if you don't know how to deal with that disappointment or failure, there's a lot of fishes in the pond right now. And so I think that for these young men that are ultra talented and ultra competitive, learning how to deal with things that are inevitable and that adversity element is really important. And I think, like, adversity is such a great teacher for quarterbacks because, it's not the kids that are the highly talented that will end up being the most successful. It's the kid that, I say one of the struggles for rookies going into the NFL is, dude, when you know how hard it is to walk in on a Monday morning when you just threw 2 picks and you're the reason you lost, to walk in and be like, here we go, boys. Like, we'll get it next week. And I think that, for quarterbacks, for just being able to move on from bad and, again, to know like you're going to make bad plays and you're going to have stupid interceptions and you're going to, like, make dumb plays. It's okay. The guy that can just brush that off and go attack the next play are the guys that are going to end up having the talent be the thing that shines the most.
Now, Dan, the key trait that I've seen from guys at the highest level be able to do what you're just describing is guys who are really comfortable in their own skin. They know who they are. So I wanted to ask you, was there a point in time in your career where you really had to evaluate through adversity that you had faced of, man, who's Dan Orlovsky? Who am I? And is some of that aspect the reason why you were able to have the successful career that you had in the NFL as a backup quarterback and then translate it into the craziest ecosystem, which is not only analyzing college and NFL football, but opinionated, being an opinionated analyst. How have you been able to make that transition and stand tall in the proverbial pocket when things are tough around you?
Because no one was ever going to outwork me. Nobody. As a player, that was a commitment I made to myself. That no one was ever going to outwork me and no one was going to ever prepare more than me. I had a coach when I was young give me, like 6 words that almost changed the way that I looked at football when he said, you have to be patiently impatient. And, when I was a kid, I'm like, what? I don't even know what that means. And it was the ability to be patient and knowing that the long game and the long journey and the process within that development, it is so paramount to be patient within that because, and even more so in this generation, Jake, because, and it's not their fault, but like when we were kids and we had to find out who the 18th president of the United States was, okay, well, we had to figure out a way to like get to an encyclopedia or get to the library. And then we had to spend time like scrolling through a book to find it. Now it's, hey, who's the 18th president of the United States? So it's right now. Or they watch us and they've watched their parents go, we need dog food delivered. Pull out my phone, bang, it's right there. So like everything for them in their life is this. Sports aren't like that. You can't Siri sports. So the patience of the end result is so paramount. But the impatience of how I went about it or how I had to learn to go about it on a daily basis was huge. The impatience of the urgency of working, the impatience of how to prepare, the impatience of like, dude, the result isn't going to just happen. You have to go get like I've often shared like I had to brainwash myself in many ways. And that's not sometimes brainwash is this negative connotation. Like you got to brainwash yourself with this urgency of like, I got to get this done now. I got to get this done today, but also being aware at the same time, like it's just not going to happen today. But if I have this mindset today and I have this mindset tomorrow and I have this mindset the next day and the next day, like after a year, 2, 3, 4 years, I'll look back and be like, oh my gosh, look how much different and better I am. And I think that's like a really like pivotal moment for me when it came to like, transitioning. And it's still the way I go about my business on TV. I go about my business. No one's going to prepare more than me. No one's going to work harder than I am. And I think when you're prepared in anything and you don't think that you're ready for whatever the opposition or the other person can send your way, that's when you're comfortable in your own skin. It goes back to my UConn days when I was like, all right, no one's going to be more prepared at the line of scrimmage. And I would get to the line of scrimmage and I guarantee you there's moments when I smiled and I was like, I got yous, like I know what you're doing. So advantage us. And it's the same thing on TV where it's like, I'll prepare and do all the work that I feel others won't. It's the Jerry Rice quote. I will do today what others won't so I can do tomorrow what others can't. And it's the same for me in TV. It's like I will be more prepared than anybody. So when I say something, it's not really an opinion. It's based upon the things that I'm watching.
It's well said. The fierce urgency of now. These quarterbacks have just been introduced over the course of our time with them around the concept of being an illuminator. Like, can you shine a light on other people? And at this position, forever, right? Like, it's the first question you ask in a production meeting. Tell me about the quarterback. What's going on at the quarterback battle?
Sure.
Same thing that's going on in recruiting now. Like, who is the committed quarterback? Same thing going on Elite 11. Who's the best quarterback in America? It is a position that gains a ton of shine. But as you know, and you've alluded to in this conversation, is like, you got to get to know your teammates. You got to shine a light on others. Can you give some tactical advice to this next generation of quarterbacks that are here at the finals, but really across the country, of how they can be an illuminator, how they could be an extension of the team and the huddle versus the staff, or just being a standalone right now transaction, which is happening a lot of times in the recruiting game?
Yeah. No teammate wants a critic. They want a role model. And I think that's the way that these quarterbacks can really demand, without asking anything from their teammates, be a role model to them and not a critic to them. No 16, 17, 18-year-old kid wants to constantly hear all the things that they're doing wrong. And because they get it from their parents and they get it from their teachers. So as a quarterback, it's all right. If I say, like, hey, I want to be the best quarterback in the country, or the best version of myself, or I want us to go win the state championship, or I want us to go win a district championship, or whatever what it's going to be, it's almost like the Tom Brady model. Everyone always asks the question of, okay, how did Tom play for so long as high at a level that he did? It wasn't because of the things that he did at 40. It was because when he was 21 or 22 years old, Tom said, I want to be the very best version of myself. And then every decision from that moment on fell under, is this going to help me become the very best quarterback that I can be and leader that I can be, or is it not? And if it doesn't, I'm just not doing it. And so I think, for these quarterbacks, if you sit there and say that you want to be the leader that you want to be, or the very best version that you want to be, okay, so when it comes to your morning process, what does that look like? And can you share it with your teammates? Okay, so is it getting up early and studying a little bit? Is it getting up early and hopping on a 15-minute Zoom to watch some tape together? Is it getting to the school together and eating breakfast together? Because that has tangible impact on, if you, it's I saw Kirk say this the other day, Cousins. It's the premise of going to the bank. When I go to the bank and I make a deposit, I deposit $100, $100, $100, $100, $100. And then all of a sudden I need $350. Well, I could go pull that $350 out. So when you are depositing that stuff with the role model element of, hey, let's watch a little tape together, let's go eat breakfast together, and let's learn a little bit about each other, let's go run sprints together. So when you run the wrong route, or when I throw a pick because you make a mistake, or hey, it's 4th and 6 and I need a person to go win on a route, I can then pull out from that relationship. Instead of me telling you, like, hey, I'm getting up early and you don't, hey, I'm getting up early. Why don't you try it one time? Try it today. And so I think the role model element of encouraging gives you the ability to hold accountable. A lot of us want to hold each other accountable without the role model or deposit element. Like, I can't demand from you things that I haven't invested in. And investing into your teammates, and the role model element and the role model gives you the ability to then bring out the very best version of them. Yogi, like, you guys know this, like, kids just want to be their best. They're just scared of it. They're scared of it. We all are, And so the more that these quarterbacks can encourage their teammates, dude, like, let's do it together. I'm going to invest in you. You invest in me. And if we fail together. You won't be alone. I think is an empowering thing.
I love that, Dan. And I can think back as a young player. I can vividly remember it in my mind. I was a freshman at BYU, getting the chance to play, and we're in a training camp practice, and this is one of our star receivers, and he misses the corner cat signal that I give him. It's in practice, competitive period. I throw it. He doesn't run the right route, and in that moment, because of the competitive fire, juice, everything else, the cachet that I'd built up in high school, I turn around and I rip into him. And the reaction that I got from him was not what I was expecting. I was expecting, yeah, okay, I got you. We'll move on. He was pissed. I mean, he looked at me like he was ready to fight me. And I couldn't understand it because I had never experienced that before. But this conversation about the cachet that you've built up through the relationships and everything else, I had not done that with him before, right? It was a on-field relationship. You catch balls, I throw it, and we hadn't done that. So guess what? Instead of putting in $350 to be able to pull that thing back, now I have to put in $1,000 to be able to regain that relationship back. And I think what you just said is so valuable for these young guys in this process because it's not about you. We're looking at you guys. It's not about you. It's about what you can do with your teammates so that they feel all in together with you and you're helping them understand what that common goal is.
Two things, Jake, just off of that. Okay, so I think a really good drill for quarterbacks, and I learned this a little bit from my kids play lacrosse. I know nothing about lacrosse. It's a huge sport here. And so sometimes, like when they first started playing lacrosse, I was like, this is the easiest sport in the world. And then they had like a coaches versus kids game. And so obviously with me and my ego, I'm like, here we go. I was the worst player in the field. I could not catch a ball. And so like that, but that gave me a perspective of how I'm approaching my kids when they're playing, if they drop a ball or they miss a throw. And I think for quarterbacks, one of the things that I always was interested in as I got older in the NFL was go run routes and see how hard it is to catch the football as a quarterback. Like go run a go route and see how hard it is to track the ball over your shoulder full speed and catch it like this. It gives you an appreciation for your guys that are doing it and how hard it is. Or go run a comeback and put your foot in the ground and have the ball in your face mask as you come out and be like, oh my gosh. And so it gives you like an appreciation for how hard, and when you're, and have your receivers watch you do it. And so like they get the understanding of like, oh, he's trying to understand how hard our job is or how hard what we do is. And like verbalize to them like, hey, I get it. It's harder than I maybe had anticipated. So I think that's a really good drill for in offensive line too. Like go try to block somebody one-on-one, see how hard it is. And so like you can encourage those guys a little more because you know how difficult their challenge is. And then the last thing is this, the perfect example is Patrick this past year, Mahomes in Kansas City. We all know that they were not a talented offense. We all know the Chiefs led the NFL in drops, led the NFL. And I will never forget, I sat in a production meeting with Patrick Mahomes, and we were talking about the drops. And we were trying to get him to, I don't want to say like, but not be politically correct with his response. We were trying to, get frustration out of him. He kept saying, we all just got to get better, and we all just got to keep working. Never once blamed the guys who their one job is to catch the ball. Never once pinned it on them. And I marveled at that player never, it was always we. We got to get better. We got to get better. I can throw it better. And I think so many of these young quarterbacks can just learn from that one focus point. And they end up winning the Super Bowl. And I firmly believe that they, in many ways, end up winning the Super Bowl because their guy never once blamed those other people. It was always about we.
I love that. All right, last one before we cut you loose here. And this is for the parents. We're all parents on this. A lot of parents are listening to this on the drive home from the Elite 11 finals or on their way to training camp or on their way to drop their kids off at college, what have you. We studied the quarterback position probably as well as anybody in America. And when you look at the history of five-star recruits, like the biggest recruits, the best quarterbacks in history, 88% of five-star recruits were not drafted in the first round. So when you hear that, everybody thinks five-star and it's a lock, especially fan base, especially now with the way college works. I'm curious, through your lens, what might you advise parents who are going through this for the first time, who are being told that their kid is the next for the first, like many times, they're the next Stafford, they're the next, you name five-star quarterback recruit in the history of time. And reality is the numbers say they're not.
Get out of the way. I would say as a parent, get out of the way. It's their journey. And when the parent leads the journey, especially, they're not 12 anymore. These kids are 16, 17, 18 years old. When the parent's leading the journey, the kid is always the follower. At some point, you got to get out of the way and switch the roles. The kid, the young man, has to start leading his journey, and you're only there to support him. You're only there to help him. You're only there to encourage him. You're there when he's going to fall, because he will. You're there to just catch him. At the end of the day, you're just there to be the parent and not the coach. Now there might be some unique circumstances where the coach and the parent are the same person, but I just think get out of the way, because so often, and there's a little bit of NIL reality as to this, is like the parents see the talent and the potential, and then it becomes like this choke out, of like, I'm not going to let you fail. And the truth is that young man is going to fail or succeed athletically, the long game wise, because of who he is, not what he is. And when you choke out the joy of the game and the fun of the game and the curiosity of the game, the talent doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't. And these kids are still kids. They're still 16, 17, and 18-year-old young men and kids. So I am all for demanding of your kids and pushing them on the controllable things. But when you start to choke them out because you don't want them to fail, that's the beginning of the end. They got to not want to, quote unquote, fail. You got to switch roles with them.
Yeah, great advice, man. We could talk for hours. Appreciate you giving us some of your time, and these quarterbacks some of your time. And would urge all the quarterbacks to keep following you, because you share so much unique content on your social platforms that I think will continue to inspire this next generation of QBs, man. Appreciate you.
I appreciate you guys, man. What a pleasure. Elite 11's so cool, man. I'll never forget my Elite 11 stories as a counselor. Some good dudes that were there. We had some fun. It was a great time. I got to get out there one day and get on the field with
Heck
the boys.
yeah, man. Got to get you out.
It's the Afterglow. Yogi Roth, Jim Thornby. That was Jake Heaps. Special guest as our co-host, and Dan Orlovsky, presented by our founding partner, 76. Jim, I love that conversation. I already know what I want to talk about, but I want to start with you, man. Like, what did you think? Questions, unanswered questions, overall vibes from Dan Orlovsky.
Well, I think it just continues the kind of the trend, that we've had with the conversation with Jake Heaps and the conversation with JJ from the Houston Texans, and when you guys from the Elite 11 world all kind of get in the same room, like the quarterback brain power is kind of off the charts here. And, we always talk about the things that we wish we could have asked. Well, I wish we could have fast forwarded to today, because I would love to talk to Dan now about all of the the former Pac-12 quarterbacks who all have been making their NFL preseason debuts of late, because it seems like they've been really again, very, very small sample size. But Caleb Williams had people raving. Michael Penix had, I think, not as great a game as Caleb, but he had one of those throws that's like one of those Michael Penix throws that you're just like, okay, yeah, I got it. I mean, Bo Nix looks like he's right there in the mix for that Broncos starting job. I wouldn't be surprised if that is the case. And even Jaden Daniels, and for now, we're still claiming him, for this show, ASU and also a SoCal high school native. So Jaden Daniels, he didn't play as much, but he did have a rushing touchdown. And it's going to be exciting to watch those guys play, and I'm going to be exciting to hear Dan break those down on ESPN. So.
Yeah, it's really cool when you say that, because we've had years in the past where a bunch of quarterbacks get drafted early. I remember I did a doc. Check it out. It's called 3 for the Show. It was on Jake Locker and his quarterback class year. And it was Cam Newton, it was Blaine Gabbert, it was Christian Ponder. I think all of them went in like the top 12. And they all didn't make it. Like, they all didn't live up to the hype of being a top 12 draft pick. This group, I don't know if they'll all do it, like Drake May. Like, there's other guys as well that have found their way into the NFL as rookies, but it just felt like a special class in college. I think those traits will transfer over. The thing that stood out to me, though, the most, that I have been quoting, and Dan, I appreciate because I have been stealing it. I've credited you, bro, but I've been stealing patiently impatient. Patiently impatient. I talked to USC about it today, earlier this week, I should say, when it came to Miller Moss. How has he been so patiently impatient, right? When he was sitting behind Caleb Williams, the guy that you just referenced. And I hope that all the young parents or quarterbacks of parents who watch and listen to this take that phrase and bottle it up and put it somewhere inside you. Because over the course of the next 2 weeks, depth charts are going to get set. Like, I just went through the West Coast. College football through the lens of the West Coast is what we do here at Y Option. A lot of these quarterback battles aren't done, at least publicly. So that means somebody's going to be a backup and somebody's going to be a third teamer. Do not, mom and dad, or do not, quarterback coach, when that individual doesn't win the job, calls you and is frustrated, is bummed, is disappointed, do not let them bail. Do not compete to see if they can be patiently impatient. Because at some point in your life, you're going to have to compete. You can't run from it. And I would urge everybody, stay through the semester. Stay through the semester. Get after it. Try to glean as much insight and expertise as you can from the guy who's starting, from the quarterback room, whether you're in high school or whether you're in college, whatever it may be, and compete to be patiently impatient. Because look at what it did for Dan. Look what I think what it'll do for Miller. You can go across the country. Like, everybody at all the top schools didn't play from jump. Everybody wasn't Trevor Lawrence, and he didn't play from jump. Remember, he had to win the job mid-season. So I urge guys to do that, and we're gonna have more people like this on. Like, it's kind of like our quarterback nerd series, Jim. Like, we had Jake on, we had Gerard Johnson, who's coach of the Texans, as he references, C.J. Stroud. We have Dan. We're gonna bring on John Glenn, who's one of the young up and coming coaches in the National Football League for the Commanders. Can't wait to talk to him about who and Jaden Daniels. We're gonna bring on Ivan Lewis, who currently works for the Seahawks and has seen a ton of elite talent at that position, let alone in college at a couple of different stops. So the Nerd Fest is going to continue, Jim, if we're cool with that. So,
yeah, let's do it.
There we go. I love it. Okay, all right. We'd be remiss if we didn't say thank you to all of you out there. It's been really cool, Jim. I got a note today that I wanted to read to you that really lit me up. It was from somebody who's been a longtime follower of this podcast, but since we rebranded it as Y Options, said, quote, "This content has been absolutely phenomenal, detailed, and you can tell how much your team pours into it." And I hope that's what a lot of you feel. We don't need all the pats on the back in that regard. It feels nice every once in a while. But the idea is that if you're going to meet us in this environment at yoption.com, we're going to compete to deliver. Jim Thornby hasn't gone to sleep before midnight in, I don't know, it's been a couple of years now, but definitely the last couple of months. You're working your tail off, Jim.
That's also a creature of habit, though. So let's not. I mean, let's not get ahead of ourselves there. I mean, I've always been the never sleep before midnight guy. So
there you go. Good. I only stay up late when I'm on the East Coast now because I've been in Happy Valley and Columbus, and just the time zone keeps me up late. All right, but to that point, we're gonna go back on the road. I might go visit your old school in Tucson. I'm definitely going to go see Jonathan Smith at Michigan State and then visit Sharon Moore at Michigan. And then we've got a really fun special surprise for you later next week, doing something for the very first time. We'll share what that is But with that being said, thank you again to Dan, to Jake, and of course our founding partner, 76. And Jim, thank you for all the hard work you do. I'm Yogi Roth. As always, stay safe. Peace.